Are there also plans to potentially have your own your own DEX, your own like liquid staking asset DEX or something like that?
That's correct. So we want to do as many third-party integrations as possible to build liquidity for the SDK assets. And what we also want to do is, have those be in a position where we work with certain stakeholders. It's actually at some level kind of like what Sunny mentioned, right? Like his vision of osmosis, which is a specialized layer one, which has sort of very high quality teams building on osmosis. I think what we're trying to do is something very similar as well, where we know that we can't build everything, right? And persistent speed stake is already kind of interlinked. What we want to do is work with very high quality teams, and we are on the process of either talking to them or having sort of already have some kind of understanding in terms of how to go about it, and still on the lookout for more teams, for anyone who might be listening, to build some of these use cases on top of persistence for these liquid staked assets. So we definitely want to work with promising teams, and in fact DEX is something that we have kind of thought about a lot in terms of what would be a good mechanism. Specific, what would be different about this? It's specific to STK assets. Now, the thing about what most people don't think about is that a yield-bearing asset's value is increasing in perpetuity. What that also means is that you have impermanent loss in perpetuity, and that's something that most people don't think about. So keeping all those things in mind, like how do you mitigate the impermanent loss or this perpetual impermanent loss that is created, and especially for like, let's say an asset like STK OSMO, which has very high inflation, the impermanent loss could be very significant. And so these are things that we're kind of thinking about and trying to see how do we create mechanisms for building liquidity on a DEX for these liquid staked assets that are yield bearing in nature. So those are the kinds of problems that we're kind of thinking about on the side, and trying to work with the right stakeholders to implement some of these solutions.
Awesome. Yeah, we're getting more and more viewers here. We are almost at 60. I feel like we're just getting warmed up here, but we're almost at 1 hour. But I think there's still some topics to cover, so I hope we're not going.
No, absolutely. Let's do it,
man. Another thing that also I see in the comments, Basil also alluded to, as a cosmonaut, we want to see Cosmos assets, right? And now earlier you mentioned SDK ETH just went live, and next up is Solana and then Avalanche. Is that because those are more conservative assets and you also might want to maybe tap into their community, bring them over to Cosmos, or what's the reasoning behind focusing on those assets?
It's a very good question. And if we take a step back and think about the philosophy of Cosmos, the most beautiful thing about the philosophy of Cosmos is that it's not tribal, right? You are essentially, driving the vision and the thought process of Cosmos is basically driving a multi-chain, ecosystem and driving interoperability between different ecosystems. So from that perspective, the whole point of we're building things outside the Cosmos ecosystem, and that's why we need to justify to cosmonauts. I think if we go back to the philosophy of Cosmos, we're actually sticking to the philosophy of Cosmos even more by trying to be as inclusive as possible and trying to work on multiple assets that may interoperate in the future with Cosmos. So from that perspective, do we want to do we have skin in the game in Atom? Yes, absolutely. Do we want to see Atom succeed? Absolutely. Do we want to see other, even if you look at something we've not spoken about is if you look at Audit One, which is a validator that we run, it's one of the largest validators on a lot of Cosmos chains. And now, getting pretty decently big on Osmosis as well. I think we're top 5 now. So from that perspective, we're heavily invested in the Cosmos ecosystem and we want to see it win. We also want to capture as much TVL as possible. And some of that TVL, does exist outside the Cosmos ecosystem. So from our perspective, like I said, if we take a step back, our fundamental principles, since we, started building, have been the same. We've obviously built different things, and some of our theses have been correct, some of our theses have been wrong. But the basic principles of betting on, proof of stake, betting on interoperability, not being tribalistic about, we're not even tribalistic about persistence itself, right? Like, I do think that there's huge amount of merit in the app chain model. And that for certain use cases, it does make sense to, launch a new, chain altogether. And so from that perspective, we don't want to, drive the tribalistic or the maximalist view altogether. We think multiple assets, multiple chains can coexist. We want to see the maximum amount of upside for XPRT holders and stakers. XPRT at the end remains at the absolute center of everything that we do. So whether that is P-Stake, whether we try to build liquidity for some of the assets that are issued through P-Stake, whether we try to build borrowing, lending, ultimately what is our North Star? Our North Star is keeping XPRT at the absolute center. Everything else, it's kind of similar to Ethereum, right? Like, people don't ask, like the Solana founders, why do you have other applications or why do you have other tokens? People don't ask, the Ethereum guys, why do you have so many applications and tokens being issued? From our perspective, it's great that we have multiple applications, we have multiple those applications having tokens, and then we have massive amount of assets. How are P-Stake and XPRT linked? The asset issuance of STK Atom and XPRT through P-Stake is happening on the persistence chain. So if we talk about what are the key performance indicators or key metrics that get tracked, for which kind of determine the success of any layer one. So number one, TVL. So as P-Stake has more assets on it, it benefits persistence. As P-Stake has more assets on it and more users, the number of transactions, increase, both normal transactions as well as IBC transactions, where we've been lagging a little bit, truly speaking, and where there needs to be a huge amount of improvement for persistence. So essentially the incentives between the application layer, which is P-Stake, and the, consensus layer, which is persistence, are heavily aligned. The only difference is that if we look at it in the industry, a lot of teams focus on either exclusively the protocol layer or exclusively the application layer. In our case, we've kind of vertically integrated all the way, where we run validators as well. We look after the consensus layer as well, which is persistence, and we look at the application layer as well. So anything to do with staking and liquid staking is sort of vertically integrated. And that, we think, helps our development team to have greater capabilities and expertise. It helps our marketing and business development and research team to go through governance proposals, in depth for various chains to bring some best practices into persistence. So, and high level, again, the same principle of not having a zero-sum game mindset has helped us, quite a bit. Where, like tomorrow Quicksilver launches, we want to be a validator there and want to contribute there as well. And obviously there will be some elements where we'll be competing as well. So high level speaking, I think the industry is still in a stage where it's sort of, collaborative but competitive as well. But over a period of time, obviously we'll see more competition. But truly speaking, from a liquid staking perspective, it makes a lot of sense for there to be multiple liquid staking solutions. Otherwise, you create all sorts of other problems for the underlying protocol, where you have one liquid staking solution fail and suddenly it's bringing down the underlying protocol itself, which obviously is not ideal.
Yeah.